The desert morning hung thin and cold over the red rocks, mist clinging to stone faces like ghosts reluctant to leave. Coyote calls faded as the sun crept up, painting the world in shades of rust and gold. Eli Carter reined his Mustang to a stop beside a hidden spring, letting the horse drink after a long night watching the cattle. The sound of splashing water caught his ear, followed by quick, panicked breathing, pushing through the yucca brush. Eli saw her, a thin woman with old bruises yellowing on her shoulders, frantically washing dust and blood from her skin. She sensed him and spun around, clutching wet fabric to herself, water dripping from dark hair plastered to her neck. "Don't look at me." The whisper came fierce and desperate, her eyes wide with a fear that went deeper than modesty. Eli turned away by instinct, the gentleman his mother raised holding stronger than curiosity. But his mind had already catalogued what mattered: dried blood on the rocks, a torn boot abandoned nearby, and strange boot prints in the dust, not hers, but following hers. His gut twisted with the knowledge that walking away meant leaving her to whatever hunted her. He shrugged off his wool coat and set it on a flat rock along with his water canteen, keeping his back turned. "I'll stay over here, ma'am. Take your time." The desert wind whistled through the canyon, carrying the scent of sage and something else, fear, sharp as gunpowder. He heard her quick movements, the rustle of fabric, a barely suppressed sob. "May," she said finally, voice barely stronger than the wind. "My name's May." She wouldn't meet his eyes when she came around the rocks, his coat hanging loose on her frame. Her hands shook as she reached for the canteen. That's when Eli saw the raw marks on her ankles where rope had bitten deep, and the thin cuts on her wrists that spoke of desperate escape. Dust rose on the horizon, 2 riders coming fast along the trail. Eli recognized the lazy, back-tilted riding style of hired guns, saw the smoke from their cigarettes, the casual way they held their reins that said they expected no trouble. Just another day's work, hunting human prey. "Behind the rocks," Eli said, quiet and firm, guiding May into the shadows. He led his horse out in a wide circle, churning up the dirt to confuse the tracks. When the riders approached, he was adjusting his saddle, looking like any cowboy taking a morning break. "Morning, boys," Eli called out, voice easy as Sunday dinner. "You fellows lost?" The lead rider, a thin man with dead eyes, studied him. Eli saw the private brand on their horse's Crowley Ranch. His stomach tightened, but his face stayed pleasant. "Looking for someone," the man said. "Woman, might have come this way." "Haven't seen anyone since yesterday, just me and the lizards out here." Eli patted his horse's neck. "You boys work for Mr. Crowley?" "That's right." The second rider shifted in his saddle, hand drifting toward his gun. "You sure you ain't seen nothing?" "Like I said, just lizards. Though there was dust kicked up northward earlier. Might have been riders. Might have been antelope. Hard to say." The men exchanged glances, then wheeled their horses north without thanks. Eli waited until they were specks in the distance before returning to May. She stood pressed against the rock face, trembling despite the warming air. "They'll be back." "Likely so." Eli studied her face, sharp bones, dark circles, the kind of tired that came from running too long. "There's a way station near San Miguel Crossing. We could make it by dark if we go the long way, through the dry creek bed." She shook her head. "Too many people. They'll ask questions." A wave of dizziness hit her, and she swayed. Dehydration. Eli recognized. 3 days without proper water would do that. She gripped his arm to steady herself, fingers thin as bird bones. They traveled through the heat of the day, sharing his meager supplies: dried beef tough as leather, hard biscuit that needed soaking to chew. Eli kept up a quiet stream of talk about his years working cattle in the Panhandle, voice calm as a river. It was an old trick for settling spooked horses, and it seemed to work on spooked people too. May said little, just nodded when he told her about the time a thunderstorm scattered 300 head across 40 miles of nothing. But when he said, "I won't look if you don't want me to, but I'm not leaving you out here alone," something in her shoulders eased just a fraction. As evening painted the desert purple and orange, they made camp behind a wall of sandstone. Eli built a small fire, the smokeless kind he'd learned from an old Apache scout. May sat as far from the light as she could while still feeling its warmth. In the flickering shadows, he saw shame written across her features, plain as words on paper. But stronger than shame was exhaustion, the kind that came from running on fear alone for too many days. "You should sleep," Eli said. "I'll keep watch." "I can't," she stopped, swallowed. "I hear things, even when there's nothing there. That's what fear does, makes ghosts out of wind." He checked his rifle, set it across his knees. "But I've got good ears and a better rifle. Nothing's getting close without me knowing." The desert settled into its night sounds, the distant bawling of cattle, the chirp of insects, the rustle of small creatures in the brush, beautiful and harsh in equal measure. The West never let you forget that survival was measured in heartbeats and water. May finally dozed, jerking awake several times with small cries. Each time, Eli would hum low an old church hymn his mother used to sing until she settled again. He didn't ask what dreams chased her. Some stories didn't need telling until the teller was ready. Dawn came like a blessing, pink and gold spilling over the mountains. May woke with a start, momentarily confused to find herself safe. The wonder in her eyes when she realized she'd actually slept, made something twist in Eli's chest. "We should move," he said gruffly, uncomfortable with the feeling. "Want to reach San Miguel before the heat gets bad." As they broke camp, May touched the coat she still wore. "This was your mother's." Eli glanced at the worn wool. "My sister's, she didn't need it anymore." May nodded, understanding passing between them without words. Loss recognized loss in this hard country. She folded the coat carefully, like it was something precious. They rode double on Eli's Mustang. May light as a ghost behind him. Her arms around his waist trembled at first, unused to trusting anyone's strength. But as the miles passed and he kept his promise, never looking back at her, never asking questions she wasn't ready to answer, the trembling eased. The hidden spring fell behind them, but the memory of her whispered plea echoed in the canyon walls. "Don't look at me." Eli understood. Sometimes being seen hurt worse than any wound. But he also understood that leaving her to face those riders alone would have been a kind of murder. So they rode toward San Miguel Crossing, toward whatever came next, while the desert watched with its 1,000 eyes and kept its silence. The abandoned Santa Fe Line way station stood like a skeleton against the morning sky, its boards weathered gray from seasons of neglect. Eli helped May down from the horse, noting how she favored her left foot. Inside, dust motes danced in the shafts of light streaming through gaps in the walls. From beneath the old counter, Eli pulled out a pair of boots left behind by some traveler, scuffed but serviceable. A coat hung on a peg, forgotten since last year's rains. May accepted them with trembling hands, her fingers running over the worn leather like it was silk. On the charred table, a wanted poster caught Eli's eye. Silas Crowley's seal marked the bottom reward offered for a woman who'd stolen jewelry and horses. He looked at May, who stood frozen, staring at the paper. "I didn't take anything," she whispered. "Nothing but my life." Eli crumpled the poster and tossed it into the cold fireplace. "I know." At the tent saloon on the edge of town, Rosa Morales ladled soup with practiced kindness, her weathered hands steady as she passed the bowl to May. The Mexican woman's eyes held understanding. She'd seen too many running from something to ask questions. "Crowley's been hiring guns," Rosa said quietly in Spanish, which Eli understood well enough. "Anyone who stands against him in the valley disappears." The saloon filled with the lunch crowd miners, cowboys, drifters. Crude comments drifted their way about the strange woman with the cowboy. Eli shifted his chair, placing himself between May and the room, his hand casual but ready near his gun. "We're leaving," he said, dropping coins on the table. They slipped out before whiskey courage could turn into whiskey violence. Old Doc McAllister's place smelled of carbolic and horse liniment. The veterinarian who doubled as the town's barber and sometimes doctor examined May's infected cuts with gentle efficiency. His eyes lingered on the rope burns, but his mouth stayed shut. "In these parts," he said, wrapping clean bandages, "folks fall down from sun and from people. Both can kill you just as dead." Eli rented a room above Ramon Gonzalez's blacksmith shop. The hammering would cover any sounds, and Ramon was known for minding his own business. That first night, the rhythmic ping of hammer on anvil seemed to calm May. She managed to sleep sitting up in the corner, Eli's coat pulled tight around her. Eli dozed in the chair by the door, rifle across his lap, the weight of it familiar as breathing. "Come morning." Eli sought out his friend Joseph Yazzie, one of the few Daine who worked the ranges around San Miguel. Yazzie's eyes missed nothing as they shared coffee behind the livery stable. "Crowley's men were here yesterday," Yazzie said. "They circled south, but they'll be back. That woman, she needs to stay hidden." "Any advice?" "Don't let her be alone. Not for a minute." Yazzie's face was grave. "Whatever she's running from, it's worse than what's chasing her." At the small adobe church, Sister Catherine welcomed them without question. The Irish nun had seen enough of the world to recognize desperation. A cluster of orphans gathered around, curious about the newcomers. May shrank back at first. Then something in their innocent faces made her attempt a smile weak as winter sun, but real. "I can help," May offered, voice stronger than it had been. "Sweep, mend clothes. I'm good with a needle." Sister Catherine handed her a clean shawl and a broom. "Everyone here starts over with small things. That's how we build new lives." In the churchyard, Eli taught young Thomas how to cinch a saddle properly. The boy was all elbows and eagerness, reminding Eli painfully of another child, another time. May watched from the doorway, and when their eyes met, something passed between them, recognition of shared loss, perhaps, or the first tender shoot of trust. The peace shattered when Deputy Quinn swaggered into the courtyard. His badge might have been official, but everyone knew Crowley paid his real salary. Quinn's smile was oil on water as he approached May. "Don't believe we've been introduced. Miss, I make it my business to know everyone in town." Eli stepped between them. "She's my cousin from back east. Came out for her health." "That's so." Quinn's eyes narrowed. "Funny. Crowley's looking for a woman. Thief, he says. Then I'm sure you'll find her." Eli's voice carried an edge sharp as a skinning knife. "My cousin Mary here's been with me since Kansas. I've got letters to prove it if you need them." Quinn backed down, but his parting words hung in the air like a threat. "You folks remember we've got laws here, such as they are." That evening, the wind kicked up dust devils in the street. May startled when a loose shutter banged against the wall, her whole body going rigid with memory. "Just the wind," Eli said softly. He secured the shutter, adding, "This door's got better latches than most hearts around here." For the first time, May laughed barely more than a breath, but genuine. It transformed her face, showing glimpses of who she might have been before fear carved hollows in her cheeks. Over a simple supper of beans and cornbread, they sat in companionable silence. Finally, May spoke. "You must think me pathetic, jumping at shadows." "I think you're still standing. That's more than most would manage." She studied him then, really looked for the first time, saw the sun lines around green eyes, the patient way he moved, like a man who'd learned not to startle easily spooked things. "Why are you helping me?" Eli was quiet for a long moment. "Maybe because someone should have helped another woman once, and didn't." He changed the subject before she could ask more. "Quinn will be back. We need to make your story solid." They spent the evening creating Mary Johnson from Kansas, a schoolteacher come west for her lungs. Sister Catherine provided paper to practice signatures. May's hands shook at first, but steadied as she wrote the false name over and over. "I was someone else before," she murmured. "Maybe I can be someone new now." Out here, plenty of folks are running from a past life. Some deserve to escape it. A commotion in the street drew them to the window. Gonzalez's forge was ablaze not accidental, judging by the smell of kerosene, as Eli joined the bucket brigade. He spotted Crowley himself in the shadows. The man's smile was thin as wire when their eyes met. The message was clear in, "I know you're harboring her." After the fire was out, Gonzalez's roof half collapsed. May pulled Eli aside. Her voice was steady despite the tremor in her hands. "He won't stop. I should leave before—" "Before what you collapse in the desert. Give those vultures an easy meal." Eli's jaw set stubborn. "You're staying." That night, May finally told him fragments of marriage she hadn't chosen. Bruises hidden under pretty dresses. Nights locked in rooms. Her fingers went white, gripping the table edge as wind rattled the windows. But she kept talking. The words seemed to drain poison from a wound. Eli listened without interrupting. When she finished, spent and shaking, he shared his own burden. "Had a sister, Sarah. Sandstorm hit when I was supposed to be watching her. I was 17. Thought I knew everything. Found her 3 days later." The confession hung between them, two griefs recognizing each other across the lamplight. May reached out, not quite touching his hand, and whispered, "Thank you." What she meant was thank you for seeing my pain without making it smaller, for sharing yours without making it bigger, for treating broken things with care instead of pity. Outside, the desert night pressed against the windows. Somewhere, Crowley's men circled like wolves. But inside the small room above the half-burned forge, two damaged people began the slow work of believing they might deserve to heal. The morning brought new life to San Miguel Crossing as ranchers prepared for the cattle drive to the railroad. Eli took a job with the Stone Creek outfit, honest work that would earn enough to buy May passage elsewhere if she chose to leave. The thought sat heavy in his chest, but he'd not cage another soul seeking freedom. At the market, whispers followed May like tumbleweeds. Some of the miners' wives clutched their baskets tighter when she passed, muttering about women who bring trouble. But Maria Littlefoot, who sold beadwork and herbs, pressed a small bundle of healing salve into May's palm without taking payment. The divide between kindness and cruelty ran sharp as a knife's edge through the town. May pulled her shawl lower, trying to disappear into the dust and bustle. Yet in the churchyard, surrounded by the orphaned children, something shifted. Her voice grew steady as she taught them letters from the tattered Bible. The youngest, a girl named Lucy, climbed into her lap without fear. May's eyes glistened, but she didn't pull away. Eli returned from the range with a simple calico dress that Rosa had sewn. May held it up against herself in the cracked mirror of the boarding house kitchen. For the first time, she looked at her reflection for more than a heartbeat. The woman staring back was thinner than before, marked by hardship, but her eyes held something new, the faintest spark of hope. Deputy Quinn returned with papers that might have been legal if you didn't look too close. "Transfer of debt," he announced, suggesting May owed Crowley money and should surrender herself. Sister Catherine examined the documents with the sharp eye of someone who dealt with frontier justice before. "These dates don't match," she said calmly. "And this signature, well, I'd need to see proper identification before accepting such claims." Quinn's face darkened. "You church folk think you're above the law. We think we serve a higher one." Sister Catherine replied, "Come back with a real judge's order." That evening, the confrontation everyone feared finally came. Crowley's men shot up the front of Gonzalez's shop, sending sparks from the forge scattering like fireflies. Eli rushed out to help douse the flames before they could spread. That's when Crowley himself appeared, clean and pressed as a Sunday deacon. evil dressed in respectability. "Heard you've been playing guardian angel, Carter," Crowley said, his smile sharp as broken glass. "Dangerous hobby in these parts. Good way for a man to lose more than he bargained for." "Just helping family," Eli replied evenly. "Family." Crowley tasted the word like wine. "Funny thing about family, they can bring such unexpected troubles. The woman you're harboring, she took something precious from me. I'm a patient man, but patience has limits." After Crowley left, May emerged from the shadows where she'd been listening. Her whole body shook, but her voice came clear. "He's talking about his ledgers. I saw them, the real ones. Names, dates, bribes. How he stole land from Widow Miller. How he had the Hendricks family burned out." "You could testify." "With what proof, my word against his?" May laughed, bitter as alkali water. "You know what they do to women who speak against powerful men?" Eli wanted to argue, but the truth of her words hung heavy between them. Instead, he said, "Then we make our own justice." Carefully. That night, as rain finally came to the desert, drumming on the tin roof like ammunition, they sat close on the boarding house porch. The smell of wet earth rose around them. Promise and renewal mixed with mud. Their shoulders touched, and neither pulled away. In the gentle darkness, May whispered her thanks not just for rescue, but for the gift of being seen as more than her wounds. Dawn brought troubling news. Yazzie had seen riders circling south of town, watching the church. "They're planning something," he warned. "Too many men for just catching one woman." Eli made a decision. "We'll take her to Mesa Azul, my old line camp from my cattle days. It's defensible, hidden, buy us time to think." May protested at first. "I won't have you losing your life for my troubles. Seems to me a life spent letting bullies win isn't worth much anyway." Eli replied, "Besides, I already lost someone by not acting. Won't make that mistake twice." They prepared to leave that evening, but May had one request. At the weekly market, she bought fabric scraps with the few coins she'd earned helping at the church. That afternoon, she sat in the courtyard, sewing a small rag doll for Lucy. Her fingers moved sure and quick, creating something beautiful from remnants. "It's not much," she said, giving it to the child. "But everyone deserves something that's just theirs." Lucy hugged the doll tight, then threw her arms around May's neck, over the child's head. May's eyes met Eli's, the yearning there for normalcy. For a life where such simple gestures didn't require courage nearly broke his heart. Word spread quickly about the woman who made toys from scraps. By evening, 3 more children had received small gifts. Their mothers watched from doorways, and Eli saw something shift in their faces. Not acceptance yet, but the first cracks in their suspicion. Old Martha, the midwife, approached May at the well. She'd delivered half the babies in the valley and feared no one, not even Crowley. "I've seen marks like yours before. Child, the kind that come from living with devils dressed as husbands." She studied May's healing wrists. "You need anything? You come to me. Some of us remember what it's like to have no choices." That night, May told Eli more of her story. How her husband Crowley's bookkeeper had discovered his employer's fraud. How he'd tried to blackmail Crowley and paid with his life, though they called it a riding accident. How Crowley had kept her prisoner, forcing her to sign papers, using fists when words failed. "I escaped during the dust storm last week," she finished. "Thought the desert would be kinder than staying. Still do." Eli reached across the space between them, his calloused hand covering hers briefly. "Desert's harsh, but it's honest harsh. Men like Crowley, they're the real wasteland." A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another. May didn't flinch this time. She was learning the difference between dangers, those that came from nature and those that wore human faces. "When we go to Mesa Azul," she said quietly, "I want to be ready. Teach me to shoot." Eli nodded. It was a reasonable request in unreasonable times. "Tomorrow, before we leave, but May, He waited until she looked at him. Fighting back doesn't mean becoming like them. I know. Her smile was sad, but determined. I just want to stop being afraid of my own shadow. Want to look at myself and see someone who can stand her ground. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and sharp. Stars emerged between racing clouds, and somewhere a night bird called. In the morning, they would run again. But tonight, sitting on the porch of a half-burned building in a town that couldn't decide whether to protect or betray them, they had this moment of peace. May had asked him once why he helped her, looking at her now scared but not broken, wounded but not defeated. Eli finally understood his own answer. Sometimes you save someone else to prove that saving is possible. Sometimes you offer hope because you need to believe in it yourself. The desert would test them tomorrow. Crowley's men would follow, but tonight they had survived another day, and in this hard land, that was its own kind of victory. The noon sun beat down like a hammer on anvil as May encountered Martha at the market square. The old midwife's knowing eyes took in the thin scar on May's wrist where rope had cut deep. Martha had delivered babies in blood and storm for 30 years. Nothing much surprised her anymore. Child, you carrying weight that ain't meant for one person, Martha said quietly, her gnarled hands gentle as they examined May's healing wounds. Sometimes speaking it aloud makes it lighter. That evening, in the safety of the church while Eli kept watch, May finally unleashed the full truth. Her voice came steady as a river, though her hands trembled in her lap. My husband, David Bennett, kept books for Crowley, found discrepancies, cattle that existed only on paper, land deeds forged, government contracts for beef that was never delivered. She paused, swallowing hard. David thought he could bargain his way to wealth, threatened to expose everything unless Crowley cut him in as partner. The candle flickered between them, casting dancing shadows on adobe walls. Outside, a dog barked at something in the darkness. They said David's horse spooked, dragged him 2 miles. May's laugh was bitter as desert alkaline. But I saw his body. Horses don't leave bruises shaped like boot heels on a man's ribs. She told how Crowley had come for her that very night, all sympathy and concern, how he'd moved her to his ranch for her own protection, how the protection became prison bars made of threats and fists. He kept me in the storage shed behind the main house, brought papers for me to sign transfer of David's property, bills of sale, letters saying I'd gone to visit family back east. Her voice dropped to a whisper. When I refused, he'd remind me how alone I was, how accidents happen so easily in the desert. Eli listened without interrupting, his presence solid as bedrock. When May described waking up after beatings, trying to remember which papers she'd been forced to sign, his jaw tightened, but he kept silent. The shame is the worst part. May continued. Not just what he did, but that I survived it, that I didn't fight harder, scream louder, die rather than sign those papers. I lived when David died, and I can't forgive myself for that. Living isn't a sin, Eli said quietly. It's the only victory you could claim. May looked at him then. Really looked. That's why you understand. Your sister you survived when she didn't. Sarah? The name came out rough. 17 years old. Trusted me to watch her during the storm. I thought I knew better. Took a shortcut. When the sand wall hit, I lost her hand in the darkness. 3 days we searched. Found her buried not 50 yards from where we'd separated. They sat with their griefs laid bare between them, 2 people who'd learned that survival could feel like betrayal. The candle burned lower, wax pooling like tears. I say, don't look at me because I'm afraid, May admitted. Afraid if people really see me. They'll know I'm a coward who chose living over honor. I see a woman who endured hell and walked out the other side. Eli replied, the rest is just noise. The next morning, May stepped into the street with new determination. Though sweat beaded her neck and her heart raced at every stair, she held her head up through the market, She bought flour and salt with coins earned from her sewing. Each transaction a small act of defiance against the voice in her head saying she should hide. Yazzie brought troubling news. Man asking about rooms with view of the church, city clothes, Eastern accent, works for law firm Crowley's law firm. The net was tightening. Eli suggested leaving immediately, but May surprised him. I'm tired of running. If I keep going, when does it end? I want to live somewhere, not just survive somewhere. Eli understood. The difference between existing and living was a canyon wide as the Colorado. Then we make our stand here, but we do it smart. He spoke with the minister and Rosa about creating legitimate work for May, a sewing class for the women who couldn't afford proper clothes. It would give her standing in the community, a reason to be there that had nothing to do with Crowley. The first class drew 3 women and a handful of children. May's hands shook as she threaded the needle, but when little Anna pricked her finger and started crying, May's nervousness vanished. She cleaned the tiny wound, made a joke about blood being the price of learning, and soon had the children laughing. Sister Catherine watched from the doorway, a small smile on her weathered face. Later, she told Eli, "That woman's finding her way back to herself. Don't let anyone steal that from her." At dinner in the rectory, Eli and May sat on the back steps. He told her about the nights under stars so thick you could read by their light, about the strange peace that came from being alone with 300 head of cattle and your own thoughts. "Out there, you learn what matters," he said. "Food, water, keeping the herd together. Everything else is just complications people made up." May leaned against his shoulder for just a moment, the first voluntary closeness she'd offered. The touch was light as a butterfly landing, but Eli felt it like a brand. This woman who flinched from shadows had chosen to trust him with her weight. However, briefly. "I want to learn to defend myself," she said. "Not to attack, but to choose. All my life, things have happened to me. I want to happen back." Eli gave her his folding knife the next morning. "This isn't about fighting. It's about knowing you have options. Sometimes just knowing is enough." May turned the knife over in her hands, studying it like a book written in a foreign language she was determined to learn. On the trail to Stone Creek, Eli was moving cattle when a shot cracked the air. The bullet buried itself in his saddle horn, a warning, not a miss. He understood Crowley's message, step aside or step into a grave. Back in town, May continued her classes. A young Chinese cook named Wei from the mining camp asked her to mend his work clothes. The frontier's mixed population Mexican, Chinese, Indian, black. Europeans slowly began accepting her presence. Outcasts recognized outcasts, and many in San Miguel knew what it was like to be judged before being known. Deputy Quinn arrived at the church with official-looking papers. Warrant for the arrest of one May Bennett, wanted for theft and breach of contract. Sister Catherine stood firm. "This is a house of God. You'll need more than suspicious papers to violate sanctuary." "Then we'll do this proper," Quinn sneered. "Town assembly. Let the good people decide if they want to harbor a thief." The assembly convened in the wooden meeting hall. May stood before her neighbors, spine straight despite her trembling. Crowley appeared in his finest suit, every inch the respectable businessman. "This woman stole from me after I showed her nothing but Christian charity," Crowley proclaimed. "I took her in after her husband's tragic accident, and she repaid me with theft and lies." The crowd murmured, some swayed by his polish and power. But then Gonzalez stood. "I seen her bruises. That ain't charity's work." Martha rose next. "Been delivering babies here 20 years. I know what a beaten woman looks like." Rosa added her voice. "Mr. Crowley, if she stole from you, where's your proof? Show us what she took." Yazzie said simply, "I tracked men following her. They weren't looking to rescue, they were hunting." The tide began to turn. Crowley's smile tightened. He leaned close to May as he passed, whispering poison. "This isn't over. These people can't watch you forever." May paled, but didn't run. That night, she told Eli about the threat, and he saw something new in her eyes, not just fear, but anger. Clean anger. The kind that burned away shame and left determination in its place. "Let him come," she said. "I'm done being hunted. Whatever happens next, I choose it." The cattle drive began at first light, dust rising like smoke signals as 400 head started their slow journey to the railroad. Eli rode point with 3 other cowboys, Sam Bridges, Luis Vega, and an old hand named Cooper who'd been pushing cattle since before the war. May stood in the churchyard watching until they disappeared into the heat shimmer, the small folding knife heavy in her pocket. "Keep it close," Eli had said, not for fighting, but for remembering you've got choices. 2 days out, Eli was scouting water when the shot came. It cracked the desert silence. Bullet slamming into his saddle horn, leather exploding in fragments. His Mustang danced sideways, well trained enough not to bolt. The message was clear as telegraph writing. Crowley owned even the empty spaces between towns. Back in San Miguel Crossing, May kept to her routine morning prayers with Sister Catherine, sewing lessons after lunch, mending work in the evenings. The Chinese cook Wei brought his canvas aprons, torn from kitchen work. His English was limited, but his smile was warm when she reinforced the seams with double stitching. "Strong now," Wei said, testing the fabric. "Like you, miss, stronger than look." The frontier's mixed population gradually accepted her presence. The Mexican women taught her to make tortillas. The 2 African-American families who ran the feed store nodded politely when she passed. Even some of the miners' wives began bringing their worn clothes for mending. Prejudice ran deep in the territories, but shared hardship sometimes built bridges that easier lives couldn't. Quinn arrived at the church on a Thursday, new papers in hand. These looked more official, proper seals. A judge's signature that might even be real. May Bennett stands accused of theft and breach of contract. She'll answer these charges before the town assembly, or I'll be forced to arrest her. Sister Catherine examined the documents carefully. "Very well, but we invoke the territorial statute. She has the right to face her accusers in public assembly. Tomorrow, noon, at the meeting hall." "Suits me fine." Quinn smirked. "Let folks see what kind of woman they've been protecting." That night, May sat rigid in the church, hands folded tight in her lap. "He'll twist everything, make my survival sound like scheming. That's what men like him do, turn your suffering into your fault." "Then we tell the truth louder," Sister Catherine said firmly. "I've sent word to everyone who's willing to listen. You're not alone in this." The meeting hall filled early, curiosity and gossip drawing folks like flies to spilled molasses. May entered with her small contingent of supporters, Sister Catherine, Rosa, Martha, Gonzalez, and, surprisingly, Wei and several other Chinese workers who rarely involved themselves in town politics. Crowley arrived like visiting royalty, his black suit pressed sharp enough to cut. 2 lawyers flanked him, carrying leather cases that promised official devastation. He took the speaking platform with practiced ease. "Friends, I come before you more in sorrow than anger," he began, voice smooth as oil. "After poor David Bennett's tragic accident, his horse spooked by a rattler. Dragged him near 2 miles, I offered his widow Christian shelter. Brought her to my ranch. Gave her food, safety, comfort in her time of grief." May's hands clenched in her lap, but she kept silent as instructed. "Let him speak first," Sister Catherine had counseled. "Give him rope to hang himself with." "How was I repaid for this kindness?" Crowley continued. "She stole jewelry that belonged to my late mother, took a horse from my stable, destroyed legal documents pertaining to her husband's debts. When confronted, she fled like the thief she is." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some heads nodded. It was a believable story, well told. Crowley produced a velvet jewelry box, opening it to reveal empty compartments. These held my mother's pearl necklace and ruby brooch, family heirlooms, priceless to me beyond their monetary value. Now gone, along with this woman's supposed virtue. May stood slowly, Sister Catherine's hand on her elbow for support. Her voice started quiet, but grew stronger with each word. Mr. Crowley speaks of charity. Let me tell you about his kindness. She pushed up her sleeves, revealing the fading bruises on her arms. These are his gifts. When I wouldn't sign papers transferring my husband's property, he gave me these. The crowd stirred uneasily. Crowley's smile tightened. The horse I stole, I took it to save my life, after being locked in a storage shed for 2 weeks. The jewelry. May laughed, sharp and bitter. I've never seen his mother's jewels, but I have seen the ledgers he wanted burned, the ones showing cattle sold to the army that never existed, government contracts for beef that went to Mexico instead. Lies. Crowley stepped forward. The ravings of a desperate woman. But May continued, voice carrying over his protests. My husband found those ledgers, thought he could blackmail his way to wealth. Mr. Crowley showed him what happens to blackmailers. A boot heel to the ribs looks like hoof prints if you don't examine too close. Old Doc McAllister stood up from the back. I remember examining David Bennett's body. Always did wonder how a horse managed to bruise him so evenly. Gonzalez raised his voice next. Crowley's men burned my shop when I helped her. That's not how innocent men act. Martha stood, all 5 feet of her radiating authority. I've birthed half this town and laid out the other half for burial. I know finger marks from rope marks. And this woman's got both. That's not charity's work, that's captivity. The tide turned like a flash flood in a dry canyon. More voices rose, people who'd kept silent from fear now finding courage in numbers. The Chinese workers, threw Wei as translator, testified about seeing riders watching the church. The Mexican families shared whispered stories of others who'd crossed Crowley and disappeared. Crowley's lawyers tried to restore order, demanding proof, calling for documents, but frontier justice operated on different rules than city courts. Here, a person's word backed by visible evidence carried weight that fancy papers couldn't match. You want proof? May reached into her pocket, pulling out a small leather journal. My husband kept copies, hidden where Crowley couldn't find them. Names, dates, amounts, every stolen contract, every forged deed. She'd kept it hidden even from Eli, trusting no one completely. Until now. The pages shook in her hands as she opened it. David's careful handwriting documenting Crowley's empire of theft. Crowley lunged for the journal, but Yazzie and Gonzalez blocked him. His composure finally cracked, revealing the rattlesnake beneath the gentleman's clothes. You worthless witch, he snarled. You think these peasants can protect you? I own half this territory. And stole the other half. Someone called from the crowd. The assembly voted not for arrest, but for territorial investigation. Crowley's weapons were confiscated, his movements restricted pending the arrival of a federal marshal. Quinn found himself relieved of his badge when his own financial ties to Crowley came to light. As the crowd dispersed, Crowley passed close to May. His whisper was soft as silk and twice as dangerous. This isn't over. These people can't watch you forever, and I'm a patient man. That night, on the flat roof of the church where they'd gone to repair loose tiles, May stood looking at the star-thick sky. The desert wind cooled the sweat from the day's ordeal. I'm staying, she told Eli when he returned from the cattle drive. Whatever comes next, I'm tired of running. I want to see what happens when I stand still. Eli studied her face in the moonlight, still thin, still marked by hardship, but with a new firmness around the mouth, a straightness to her shoulders that hadn't been there before. Then I'm staying too, he said simply, if you'll have me around. May smiled, the expression transforming her face. I'd like that, though I should warn you I'm trouble. I've been too safe too long anyway. They worked on the roof tiles as the night deepened, side by side in comfortable silence. Below them, San Miguel Crossing slept fitfully, a town that had chosen justice over ease, community over fear. It wasn't a perfect victory. Crowley still breathed, still plotted. But tonight, May Bennett Nee Carson stood in the open air, no longer whispering, "Don't look at me," Tonight, she dared the world to see her clearly, scars and all. The fire started just after midnight, orange tongues licking up the walls of Gonzalez's barn, where the town stored winter feed. Eli jerked awake to the sound of the church bell clanging its alarm. By the time he reached the street, half the town had formed a bucket line from the well. May worked alongside the others, passing water hand to hand, her face lit by the hellish glow. Black smoke rolled across San Miguel Crossing like a curse made visible. Children coughed and cried as their parents rushed them to safety. The fire jumped to the barn roof, sending a shower of burning hay into the night sky. "The wind's pushing it toward the houses," someone shouted. Eli organized teams, one to wet down the threatened buildings, another to clear a fire break. His shoulders burned from hauling water, but he kept moving. May appeared at his elbow with a wet cloth for the smoke. Their eyes met briefly. Sharing the same thought, Crowley's response to the town meeting had arrived. By dawn, they'd saved most of the structures, but Gonzalez's barn lay in smoking ruins. Half the winter feed for the town's livestock gone. Deputy Quinn was conspicuously absent during the fire, though several people reported seeing him earlier that evening near Crowley's men. The whispers started before the ashes cooled. "That woman brought this on us. Maybe Crowley's right about her. We were fine before she came." Fear spoke louder than courage in the gray morning light. Some who'd stood with May yesterday now avoided her eyes. The fickleness of frontier alliances showed itself. Survival often trumped principles when danger knocked. Yazzie tracked boot prints from the fire scene. The distinctive heel marks belonged to Crowley's hired guns. But knowing and proving were different animals in a town where the law wore whatever face paid it best. "We need to get you away from here," Eli told May as they surveyed the damage. "Just for a few days. Let things cool down." May's jaw set stubborn. "That's what he wants. Run me off so he can say I'm guilty. I'm through being herded like cattle." But when Sister Catherine reported strangers asking about the church's routines and which room May slept in, even her determination wavered. These weren't idle threats anymore. Mesa Azul. Eli decided, "My old line shack, defensible, good sight lines, water nearby. We go tonight." They left after Vespers, taking the back trails Eli knew from his cattle days. The moon was new, offering only starlight to guide them. May rode behind him on his Mustang, arms tight around his waist as they navigated the rocky paths. 3 hours out, they heard pursuit horses moving fast, too fast for safe night riding. Crowley's men were desperate or foolish or both. Eli turned into a dry wash, urging his horse up the soft sand that would muffle their tracks. The ambush came at Skeleton Ridge. Gunfire exploded from the rocks above, muzzle flashes like angry stars. Eli's horse screamed and stumbled. They rolled clear as bullets whined overhead, finding cover behind a fallen cottonwood. "Can you shoot?" Eli pressed his spare revolver into May's hands. "I'm about to learn." The firefight was brief but vicious. May's hands shook, but she squeezed the trigger when a shadow moved too close. The recoil surprised her, but the yelp from their attackers surprised her more. She'd drawn blood not fatal, but enough to make them reconsider. Eli caught one in the shoulder, spinning him back. The others retreated, dragging their wounded. In the sudden quiet, they could hear Eli's horse laboring to breathe, a bullet in its chest. "I'm sorry, boy." Eli ended the animal's suffering with a single shot. His face carved from stone, that Mustang had carried him through 5 years of cattle drives. They walked through the remaining darkness, Eli's Winchester ready, May carrying their few supplies. Dawn found them at Mesa Azul, the abandoned line shack squatting like a turtle against the hillside. The shack had seen better. Decades' winds sang through gaps in the walls, and the door hung crooked, but the roof held, and the stone fireplace still drew clean. A spring bubbled nearby, hidden by a screen of willows. Eli's shoulder seeped blood where a bullet had grooved it during the fight. May cleaned the wound with steady hands, no longer the trembling woman he'd found at the spring. when he sucked air through his teeth at the sting of whiskey on raw flesh. She almost smiled. "Hurts less than what you did for me," she said quietly. That night, fever took him. Not dangerous, but enough to fog his mind. Eli dreamed of sandstorms and searching, of Sarah's voice calling through the wind. He woke to find May cooling his forehead with a damp cloth, humming something that might have been a lullaby. "I dream about her too," May said softly. "My sister died when I was 12, lung fever. I used to think if I'd prayed harder, been better, God might have spared her." "Bargaining with the Almighty," Eli muttered. "Never works out like we hope." "No, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is we keep trying to be better anyway." By the second day, Eli's fever broke. They settled into a routine standing watch, gathering wood, sharing the meager food they'd brought. The enforced closeness stripped away pretense. They talked through the long hours, trading stories like cards in a poker game. May spoke of her father, a school teacher who'd believed education could solve any problem until drink solved him. Eli told her about his mother, a preacher's daughter who'd scandalized her family by marrying a cowboy, then raised her children with equal parts Bible verses and practical wisdom. "She would have liked you," Eli said, watching May mend a tear in her skirt with precise stitches. She appreciated women who endured. On the third night, coyotes circled the shack, drawn by the scent of their dwindling food supplies. May sat up straight, hand going to the revolver, but Eli just added wood to the fire. "They're just curious, testing boundaries, like people. Really." May studied his profile in the firelight. "Is that what you were doing, testing boundaries, when you helped me?" "Maybe, or maybe I was tired of walking wide of things that mattered." The confession hung between them like morning mist. May moved closer on the rough bench, not quite touching, but near enough to share warmth. Outside, the coyotes yipped and argued. Inside, two damaged people sat in companionable silence, learning the shape of trust. On the fourth morning, Yazzie appeared like smoke from the desert. He'd tracked them, bringing supplies and news. "Crowley's locked up tighter now. Federal marshals coming. But his men are still loose, still hunting. Town split, half want to fight. Half want to forget this happened." "And Sister Catherine?" May asked. "Tough as saddle leather. She's got the women organized, taking turns watching for trouble. Rosa's feeding everyone who stands guard. Even got some of the miners involved." Yazzie's weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. "Seems your sewing circle turned into something else." The image of the town's women standing guard made May's eyes water. She'd been alone so long. The idea of community still felt foreign as a new language. "We could keep running," Eli offered. "California, Oregon, start fresh where Crowley can't reach." May looked around the shabby shack that had become their refuge. Through the gaps in the walls, she could see the desert stretching endless and unforgiving, but also beautiful, also honest. "No," she said firmly. "I'm done letting fear choose my path. We go back, face whatever comes." Yazzie nodded approval. "Tomorrow night, I'll have horses waiting at Dutchman's Creek." After he left, May and Eli sat on the rickety porch, watching the sun paint the rocks in shades of blood and gold. She leaned against his shoulder, and he wrapped his good arm around her. It was the first time she'd sought comfort rather than just accepting it. "I'm scared," she admitted. "But it's different now. Before, fear was all I had. Now it's just one thing among many." "What are the other things?" May was quiet for a long moment. "Hope, anger at the right people instead of myself, and—" She turned to look at him directly. "Whatever this is between us." Eli had kissed women before quick stolen moments at dances, farewell embraces before cattle drives. But when May lifted her face to his, it felt like the first time that mattered. Her lips were chapped from desert wind, tasted of alkali dust and courage. When they parted, her eyes were wet but steady. "When we get back," Eli said roughly. "After this is settled, Would you let me court you proper? Do things right." May's laugh was shaky but real. "Eli Carter, we've been shot at, burned out, and chased across the desert. I think we're past proper." "Maybe, but you deserve it anyway." That night, their last at Mesa Azul, they lay on opposite sides of the fire as always. But the space between them hummed with new possibility. Tomorrow would bring danger Crowley's men, town politics, the uncertain protection of law. But tonight, under the vast desert sky, two people who'd learned to expect nothing dared to hope for something. The coyotes had given up and gone hunting elsewhere. The wind died to a whisper, and in the dying firelight, May whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me when I couldn't see myself." The confrontation erupted in Crowley's study, a room that reeked of cigar smoke and cruelty. Quinn burst through the door first, gun drawn, but Yazzy's shot sent the lamp crashing down, plunging them into chaos. Glass shattered, oil spread, and small fires bloomed like deadly flowers across the Persian rug. In the darkness, shapes moved and collided. Eli kept his gun on Crowley while May faced her demons in the very room where she'd once been imprisoned. Her voice cut through the confusion, steady as she'd practiced. "The ledgers are in the false bottom of the whiskey cabinet," she announced. "Every forged deed, every stolen contract, every bribe to Quinn and Judge Watson." Crowley lunged for his desk drawer, but Eli was ready. The gun came up, steady despite the chaos around them. "Don't make me do it, Crowley. I'd rather see you hang legal." The rancher froze, calculating. Around them! The struggle continued, Yazzie and Quinn grappling near the window. Hired guns stumbling in the smoke. May found the hidden compartment, pulled out leather-bound books that contained enough evidence to hang half the territory's powerful men. "You think this matters?" Crowley snarled. "You think anyone will believe a lying woman and a saddle tramp?" "They'll believe this," May said, holding up the ledgers. "Your own handwriting, your own pride in documenting every crime." The fire from the broken lamp began to spread. Licking at the heavy curtains, smoke thickened. They needed to move. Eli made a choice that would haunt him. He could shoot Crowley now. End it all. Claim self-defense in the confusion. His finger tightened on the trigger. "No," May said quietly, seeing his struggle. "We do this right. We're better than him." The moment passed. Eli lowered his gun slightly, gesturing Crowley toward the door. It was then that Quinn made his desperate play, breaking free from Yazzie to draw on Eli. But May had learned to watch for danger. Her shot took Quinn in the shoulder, spinning him into the burning curtains. They dragged both men out as the study became an inferno. In the courtyard, Crowley's remaining men had already surrendered, surrounded by townsfolk who'd ridden out with Sister Catherine and Gonzalez. The community had chosen its side at last. The ride back to San Miguel Crossing felt like a funeral procession in reverse instead of grief. There was grim satisfaction. Crowley rode with hands bound, his empire of fear crumbling with each mile. May carried the ledgers in her saddlebags, evidence that would reshape the territory. At the edge of town, half the population waited. Some came for spectacle, others for justice. But most came to see if the stories were true, if the scared woman who'd whispered, "Don't look at me," had really brought down the valley's strongest man. The town hall overflowed. Federal Marshal James McBride had arrived that morning, a lean man with eyes like winter. He'd seen enough frontier justice to know when to let communities police themselves, but also when to step in. "This isn't a trial," McBride announced. "That'll come later. In federal court. This is a hearing to determine if sufficient evidence exists to hold Mr. Crowley and his associates." Crowley's lawyers tried to object, but the marshal shut them down. "Gentlemen, you're in my jurisdiction now. We do things different out here." The evidence mounted like a desert thunderstorm. May presented the ledgers, her voice growing stronger with each entry she read. Gonzalez testified about the fire. Doc McAllister finally spoke the truth about David Bennett's injuries. Even some of Crowley's own men, seeing which way the wind blew, offered testimony in exchange for leniency. When Crowley's turn came, he played his last card character assassination. He stood tall, every inch the respectable businessman, and began his poison. "This woman is a liar and worse. She seduced my poor bookkeeper Bennett, drove him to attempt blackmail, then killed him when he developed a conscience. She came to me for help, played on my Christian charity, then robbed me when I refused her advances." The crowd murmured. Some of the doubts May had feared began surfacing on faces. Crowley pressed on, voice rising with manufactured indignation. "She's fooled you all. A woman of low morals, spreading her legs for any man who'll protect her. First Bennett, now this drifter Carter. Who knows how many others?" May flinched as if slapped. This was her nightmare, not the physical violence, but the public shaming, the reduction of her survival to sordid transaction. She felt the old urge to shrink, to whisper, "Don't look at me," and disappear. But Eli stepped forward, and his voice carried the quiet authority of truth. "I've stood by while a lot of things happened in my life. Stood by and watched my sister die. Stood by and let fear make my choices, but I won't stand by for this." He faced the crowd, hat in hand. "You all want to know what kind of woman May Bennett is. She's the kind who teaches children to read when her own hands shake with fear. The kind who mends clothes for folks who whisper behind her back. The kind who survived hell and came out human." Pretty words from her latest conquest. Crowley sneered. "You want to talk about character?" Eli's voice hardened. "Let's talk about the bruises I saw, the rope marks, the way she couldn't sleep for fear of footsteps. Let's talk about a man who beats women and calls it charity." Sister Catherine stood next. "I've given sanctuary to many souls. I know the difference between shame and guilt. May carries shame for surviving. Crowley carries guilt for what he's done. One deserves compassion. The other deserves justice." The testimony continued, voice after voice. Way spoke through an interpreter about seeing May's kindness despite her pain. Martha talked about healing bodies and wounded spirits. Even some who doubted came forward, admitting they'd let fear cloud their judgment. Crowley's composure finally cracked completely. "You fools, you're destroying everything I built. This territory was nothing before me. These people were nothing." "And that's the truth at last," Marshal McBride said quietly. "You see people as things to own. That's what makes men like you dangerous." The marshal's decision was swift. Crowley would be held for federal trial on charges of murder, assault, fraud, and conspiracy. His associates faced similar fates. The courtroom erupted in mixed reactions: relief, vindication, and, for some, the uncomfortable realization of their own complicity in looking away for too long. As Crowley was led out, he made one last attempt to wound May. "This isn't over. I've got friends, influence. You'll never be safe, never be respectable. Everyone will know what you are." May stood straight, meeting his eyes fully for the first time. "I know what I am. I'm alive, I'm free, and I'm done being afraid of you." The words came clear and strong. No whisper, no plea. She'd found her voice at last. That evening, the town celebrated cautiously. Justice had been served. But everyone knew the price of standing up to power. There would be repercussions, attempts at revenge, the slow work of rebuilding trust. On the church steps, May sat with Eli watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of hope. Her hand found his, fingers intertwining with the ease of rivers finding the sea. "You stood up for me," she said quietly, "in front of everyone." "You stood up for yourself. That's what mattered." May leaned into his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. "All those things Crowley said, some people will believe them. You know that." "Let them. I know who you are. You know who you are. The rest is just noise." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, each one a small victory against the dark. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Crowley had friends who might seek revenge. The town would need to heal from its divisions. May would face the federal trial, reliving her nightmare in a courtroom far from home. But tonight, she sat in the open, unashamed and unafraid. The woman who'd once whispered, "Don't look at me," now faced the world with clear eyes. She'd learned the difference between being seen and being judged, between survival and living. "I love you," Eli said simply, the words falling like rain in the desert, unexpected but vital. May turned to face him fully, her smile mixing tears and joy. "I love you too, despite everything, because of everything. You saw me when I couldn't see myself." Sister Catherine appeared with a gentle cough. "I don't mean to interrupt, but there's someone here needs to speak with May." A young woman stood in the shadows, hollow-eyed and trembling. Her dress was torn, her arms marked with familiar bruises. She looked at May with desperate hope. I heard you stood up to him, to men like him. Would you help me?" May rose without hesitation, extending her hand to the stranger. "Come inside. You're safe here. Let's get you some food and we'll talk." As she led the woman into the church, May glanced back at Eli. He nodded, understanding. This was how healing worked, not just for yourself, but reaching back to pull others from the darkness. The cycle of "don't look at me" would end here, one woman at a time, one voice at a time, until the whispers became declarations and the shame transformed into strength. The night Crowley escaped started like any other. The temporary jail, really just a reinforced room behind the marshal's office, had 2 guards on duty. But money spoke louder than duty, and by midnight, the cell stood empty. The fire started an hour later. The grain warehouse erupted in flames that could be seen for miles, orange tongues licking the desert sky. The drought had left everything tinder dry, and the wind chose that night to blow hard from the west, pushing the fire toward the orphans' quarters. Eli was first to spot the danger. "The wind's shifting, it's heading for the children." The townspeople rushed from their beds, still in nightclothes, forming desperate bucket brigades. But the fire moved faster than human hands. Sparks jumped from building to building like evil spirits, and the air filled with smoke thick as wool. May worked with Sister Catherine to evacuate the children, using a rope line Martha had suggested, each child holding tight to the next. Following May's voice through the blinding smoke, her lungs burned and her eyes streamed, but she kept calling out, "Follow my voice! Hold the rope!" Above the roar of flames came a child's scream. Lucy, the little girl who'd first trusted May, was trapped on the dormitory's upper floor. The stairs had already caught fire. Without thinking, May grabbed a ladder and started climbing. The heat hit her like a physical blow, singeing her hair and blistering her hands on the hot rungs. Behind her, Eli held the ladder steady while shouting for wet blankets. "May, the roof's going." She couldn't stop, not for Lucy, not when the child's terrified face appeared at the window. May smashed the glass with her elbow, wrapping Lucy in her shawl just as the roof beam cracked overhead. They fell rather than climbed, Eli breaking their fall as burning debris rained down. For a moment, May couldn't breathe, not from smoke, but from the crushing fear that she'd failed another child. Then Lucy coughed and clung tighter, alive and whole. "You came," Lucy sobbed. "You came for me." The crowd cheered as they emerged from the smoke, but there was no time for celebration. The fire still raged, threatening to consume half the town. That's when they saw him. Crowley stood at the edge of the firelight, his fine clothes replaced with trail gear, preparing to mount a horse. Quinn stood beside him, arm in a sling from May's bullet, holding the reins. In the chaos, they might have escaped, but Crowley couldn't resist one last moment of gloating. He raised his pistol toward May, his face twisted with hatred. "You should have kept quiet, woman. Should have known your place." The shot came, but not from Crowley. Old Gonzalez, his ancient rifle steady despite his 60 years, put a bullet through Crowley's gun hand. The weapon spun away into the darkness. Yazzie appeared from the smoke like an avenging spirit, his own rifle trained on Quinn. "Drop it, now!" Quinn tried to run, but his wounded arm betrayed him. He stumbled, fell, and found himself surrounded by the very people he'd oppressed for years. There was no mercy in their eyes, but there was justice. Crowley, cradling his shattered hand, tried to bargain. "I've got money hidden, gold. I can make you all rich." "We don't want your gold," Rosa said, her usually kind face hard as flint. "We want our town back." May stepped forward, Lucy still clinging to her skirts. She looked at Crowley, really looked at him for the first time without fear. He seemed smaller somehow, diminished without his power and threats. Just a cruel man who'd mistaken fear for respect. "You're nothing," she said quietly. "You were always nothing, just a bully with money, and now you're not even that." The federal marshal arrived with the dawn, having ridden hard when he saw the fires glow. He surveyed the scene, half the town in ruins. Crowley and Quinn under citizen's arrest. May standing tall despite her singed clothes and blistered hands. "Seems like you folks handled things," McBride said dryly, "though I'll need statements from everyone." The trial that followed was swift. With Crowley's escape attempt and the arson witnessed by dozens, even his expensive lawyers couldn't argue innocence. The federal court had seen enough of frontier justice to know when to apply the full weight of law. Judge Harrison, brought in from Denver, was known for his fairness and his intolerance of men who abused power. He listened to the testimony with sharp attention, occasionally interrupting to clarify points. When May took the stand, she spoke clearly and without shame. She detailed her imprisonment, the forced signatures, the beatings, but more than that, she spoke of the system that allowed such men to flourish, the conspiracy of silence, the willingness to look away, the way power protected itself. "Mr. Crowley believed he owned people," May concluded. "Not just their labor or their land, but their very souls. He believed fear gave him that right. He was wrong." Crowley's lawyers tried to break her, bringing up her past, her marriage, insinuating she'd been complicit in her husband's schemes, but May had found her spine in the fire and smoke. She answered each question directly, refusing to be shamed for surviving. "Yes, I took his horse to escape. Yes, I kept my husband's ledger hidden. Yes, I shot Deputy Quinn when he tried to kill Mr. Carter. I'd do it all again. Survival isn't a crime, no matter what men like Crowley tell you." The jury, 12 men from various territories, deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. Crowley would serve 25 years in federal prison. Quinn got 15. Their Confederates received lesser sentences, but enough to ensure they'd never terrorize another town. As they led Crowley away, he looked broken, disbelieving. In his world, money had always bought freedom. May watched him go without satisfaction or regret. He was simply done. A chapter closed. Outside the courthouse, the San Miguel Crossing delegation waited. They'd traveled 3 days to support May, leaving their burnt town to rebuild itself. Sister Catherine hugged her tight. "You did it, child. You spoke for all of us." But May shook her head. "We did it, all of us together." The journey home was different from the fearful flight to Mesa Azul. This time, May rode her own horse bought with wages from her sewing work, head high, no longer looking over her shoulder. Eli rode beside her, their knees occasionally brushing, comfortable in shared silence. When they crested the last hill before town, they saw the rebuilding had already begun, where the warehouse had burned. New frames rose like skeletons awaiting flesh. The orphanage wore fresh adobe patches. Gardens were being planted in the ash-enriched soil. "It's not the same town," May observed. "No," Eli agreed. "It's better. Fire does that sometimes clears away the rot so new things can grow." That evening, there was no celebration. People were too tired, too aware of how much work lay ahead. But there was something better. A quiet determination. A sense of community forged in crisis. May reopened her sewing shop in a new building, the sign reading, "May's Alterations and New Beginnings." The young woman she'd helped that night, Rebecca, worked alongside her, learning the trade and slowly healing from her own escapes. Sister Catherine proposed something unprecedented, a fund for women seeking to leave dangerous situations. Small loans. No questions asked, backed by the church and whatever donations people could spare. The men grumbled. But the women who'd seen what silence cost contributed their egg money, their sewing funds, their saved pennies. "It's not much," Martha said, adding $5 to the pot. "But it's a start." May and Eli stood together at the desert's edge as purple twilight settled over the wounded but healing town. Tomorrow there would be work, always work in a frontier town, but tonight they had this moment of peace. No more looking over shoulders. Eli said, "No more running. Think you can handle a quiet life?" May laughed, the sound free and clear as church bells. "After everything, I think quiet sounds perfect." She paused, then added with a sly smile, "Mostly quiet. There's still that proper courtship you promised." "Woman, we've been through fire, gunfights, and federal court. How much more proper can it get?" She pretended to consider. "Well, there could be flowers. Maybe a picnic, dancing at the harvest social." Dancing. Eli shook his head in mock despair. "You'll be the death of me yet." "No," May said softly, taking his hand. "I'll be the life of you, just like you were mine." They stood together as the first stars appeared. Two people who'd learned that sometimes the greatest courage was simply facing forward, refusing to let the past define the future. Behind them, San Miguel Crossing settled into evening routines, children called to supper, hammers put away for the night, lamps lit in windows like small promises against the dark. The woman who'd once whispered, "Don't look at me," now stood in full view, unashamed and unafraid, and the town that had once looked away now kept watch, understanding at last that everyone's safety depended on everyone's courage. The rains came gentle that spring, softening the hard earth and washing the last ash from the fire into memory. May's shop on Main Street bore a simple sign, "Bennett and Friends, Alterations and New Beginnings." The "and friends" part mattered. Anyone who needed work could find a place at the sewing tables. No questions asked beyond, "Can you hold a needle?" The space hummed with activity. 3 sewing machines clattered in rhythm while women bent over their work, voices mixing English, Spanish, and Chinese as they shared techniques. Rebecca, the young woman May had helped months ago, now taught others the invisible mending stitch that could make torn things whole. Eli had taken steady work managing the Riverside Ranch, teaching young cowboys the patient way of handling cattle. Most evenings found him in the churchyard, showing boys like Thomas how to rope and ride, but mainly how to be men who protected instead of prayed. May's nightmares had faded to occasional shadows. When they came, she no longer woke gasping and afraid, but simply lit a lamp and read until peace returned. Sometimes she'd find Eli on the porch, keeping his own vigil against memories of sandstorms and loss. "Can't sleep either," she'd ask. "Just enjoying the quiet," he'd reply, making room beside him on the bench. They'd sit together, not needing words, until dawn painted the mountains pink and gold. The shop became more than a business. Women gathered there for more than sewing. They came for the coffee Way's cousin brought from the restaurant, for the gossip and laughter, but mostly for the safety of being seen without judgment. May never asked why someone's dress needed mending so often, or why they paid in coins saved penny by penny. She simply provided thread, patience, and understanding. One morning, an envelope arrived, addressed in careful copperplate. May's hands trembled as she opened it, recognizing the legal letterhead. But instead of threats, it contained a bank draft, David's life insurance. Finally released after Crowley's conviction proved the death was murder, not accident. "It's enough to buy the building," May told Eli, staring at the numbers. "To make the shop permanent." "What do you want to do?" May folded the paper slowly. "Part of me wants to burn it. Blood money. But..." She looked around the shop, at Rebecca teaching a miner's wife to embroider, at Way's sister working on a christening gown. Maybe something good should come from all that pain. They bought the building and the empty lot beside it. Plans were drawn for expansion, more workspaces, a small apartment upstairs for women needing temporary shelter, a garden in back where children could play while their mothers worked. The prejudice hadn't vanished overnight. Anonymous notes still appeared sometimes, ugly words scrawled by those who preferred their women silent and their social order unchanged. May kept them all in a box beneath her counter. "Why save them?" Rebecca asked once. "To remember," May replied. "To remember there's still work to do." The spring social approached, and with it the dance Eli had promised. May found herself oddly nervous. Standing before her mirror in a new dress, not fancy, but properly fitted and free of patches. Her hands were rough from work, her face marked by sun and struggle, but her eyes held warmth that hadn't been there before. "You look beautiful," Sister Catherine said from the doorway. "Not despite everything. Because of it, you've earned every line, every scar." The dance was held in the new community hall, built where the warehouse had burned. Fiddle music spilled into the street, mixing with laughter and the stamp of boots on boards. May hesitated at the threshold, old instincts whispering warnings about crowds and exposure. Then Eli appeared, cleaned up in his best shirt, holding out his hand. "May I have this dance, Miss Bennett?" She took his hand, letting him lead her into the light and noise. They danced awkwardly. At first, neither had much practice with gentle things, but gradually they found their rhythm, moving together like they'd learned to work together, each supporting the other. "People are staring," May murmured. "Let them," Eli replied. "They're seeing something worth looking at. A woman who survived, a woman who helps others survive, a woman who—" He stopped, suddenly shy. "Who what?" "Who I'd like to marry, if she'll have me." May missed a step, nearly treading on his boot. Around them, other couples swirled, but she saw only Eli's face, earnest and hopeful and slightly afraid. "That's your idea of proper courtship, proposing during a dance? Would you prefer I ask while fighting outlaws, or maybe during another fire?" She laughed, the sound bright as silver bells. "I suppose a dance is proper enough?" Her expression grew serious. "But Eli, I may never be an easy woman to live with. The nightmares, the memories. And I'm a man who lost his sister and spent 10 years punishing himself for it. We're both carrying ghosts. Maybe that means we understand how to help each other lay them down." May studied his face, seeing the truth there. They were both broken in places, scarred by loss and guilt. But broken things could be mended, made useful again if not perfect. Her shop proved that daily. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." The engagement was announced at Sunday service. Some tongues wagged, but more people offered congratulations. The women from May's shop surrounded her with fierce protectiveness, while the Cowboy's Eli worked with slapped his back and made rough jokes about domestication. They planned a simple wedding for autumn. When the heat broke and the aspens turned gold, May threw herself into work with new energy, as if happiness was something that required constant motion to maintain. The shop expanded, taking on 2 more seamstresses and a girl to mind the children while their mothers worked. One evening, a familiar figure appeared at the shop door. May looked up from her cutting table to find Judge Watson Crowley's old Confederate hat in hand, looking smaller than she remembered. Every muscle in her body tensed. Behind the counter, Rebecca's hand moved toward the drawer where they kept Eli's old revolver. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Watson said quickly. "I came to apologize and to warn you." May straightened slowly. "Speak your piece." "Crowley's reach was longer than you know. He had partners back east, men who lost money when he fell. They might come looking to collect what they think they're owed. And you're telling me this why?" Watson's shoulders sagged. "Because I have a daughter, 16 years old, and watching what you did, standing up to him. It made me think about the world I'm leaving her. I wasn't brave enough to fight him, but maybe I can do this one right thing. May studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Thank you for the warning. Now get out of my shop. After Watson left, May called a meeting. Eli, Yazzie, Sister Catherine, Marshal McBride, the core of those who'd stood with her. They discussed precautions, plans, the reality that some victories came with lasting prices. We could still leave, Eli offered. Start fresh somewhere else. May looked around the room at these people who'd become her family. Thought of the women learning trades in her shop, the children playing in the yard. No, she said firmly. I'm through running. If trouble comes, we face it here, together. The summer passed peacefully. May's bad days grew fewer, though they never disappeared entirely. Sometimes a sound or smell would transport her back to Crowley's prison, leave her shaking and sick, but now she had anchors Eli's steady presence, the rhythm of sewing machines, Lucy's daily visits to show off her improving letters. The wedding day dawned clear and bright. May dressed in Sister Catherine's small room, her hands steady as she pinned up her hair. The dress was her own creation, simple but elegant, each stitch a small act of reclamation. Second thoughts? Sister Catherine asked. No, May said, surprised by her certainty. For the first time in my life, I know exactly where I want to be. The ceremony was held in the church garden. Half the town attended, filling the space with color and warmth. May walked alone down the makeshift aisle she'd given herself away once before and wouldn't repeat that mistake. This time, she came to love as her own woman, complete in herself. Eli waited at the altar, Yazzie beside him as best man. When their eyes met, May saw her own wonder reflected that two people so marked by loss could find such joy. The vows were simple, the promises real, to stand together against whatever came, to build something lasting from the ashes of what they'd survived, to choose hope over fear, trust over isolation. When Eli kissed her, gentle and sure, the crowd erupted in cheers. Even the miners who'd once whispered about the troublesome woman were clapping. Change came slow in frontier towns, but it came. The reception spilled into the street. Tables groaned under food provided by the whole community. Rosa's tamales, Way's dumplings, Martha's cornbread. Children ran between the dancers while old men told lies about their younger days. As twilight fell, May and Eli slipped away to the porch of their new home, a small house behind the shop. Nothing fancy, but solidly built. They sat together, still in their wedding clothes, watching the stars emerge. No more, don't look at me, Eli said softly. May smiled, leaning into his warmth. No, now it's look at us. Look at what we built from ashes. Look at what becomes possible when people choose courage over comfort. Inside the house, their few possessions weighted his ranch gear, her sewing supplies, the beginning of a shared life. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Watson's warning lingered, and the work of healing was never truly done. But tonight, May Carter sat with her husband on their own porch, unafraid of being seen. The woman who'd once hidden in shadows now lived in the light, surrounded by community, protected by love, defined not by what had been done to her but by what she'd chosen to do. The desert wind carried the sound of music from the ongoing celebration, mixing with coyote calls and the eternal whisper of sand against stone. It was a hard land still, unforgiving and beautiful in equal measure. But it was home now, truly home, and May faced it with clear eyes and an open heart. 5 years had weathered San Miguel Crossing like river stones, smoothing rough edges while revealing hidden strengths. The town had grown a new bank, a proper schoolhouse, even a small hotel for travelers passing through on the expanded railroad line. Progress came to the frontier whether folks wanted it or not. May's shop had become an institution. Bennett and friends now occupied 3 buildings, employing 15 women full-time and teaching dozens more. The sign had faded under desert sun, but May wouldn't replace it. "It's earned its weathering," she'd say, running her fingers over the worn letters. Eli had risen to foreman at Riverside Ranch, known throughout the territory for his fair treatment of hands and his innovative approaches to managing cattle in drought years. He still came home each evening dusty and tired, but with purpose in his step. The boy who'd lost his sister had become a man who protected what mattered. Their home behind the shop had grown too, an extra room added when they took in Lucy after her last relative passed. The girl, now 13, had May's determination and Eli's patience, a daughter of choice if not blood. She helped in the shop after school, her quick fingers and quicker mind absorbing everything. One morning, the past arrived in an expensive carriage. May looked up from cutting fabric to see a man in Eastern clothes examining her shop sign. Something in his bearing, the way he held himself apart from the dusty street, sent old warnings singing through her bones. "Mrs. Carter." The man's voice was cultured, cold. "My name is Harrison Wells. I represent certain interests that were affected by Silas Crowley's imprisonment." May set down her scissors carefully. Around the shop, work continued, but she felt the subtle shift as her seamstresses stayed alert. Rebecca moved closer, hand drifting to her pocket where May knew she kept a small knife. "Mr. Crowley's affairs have nothing to do with me," May said evenly. "Perhaps not directly, but you possess certain documents, ledgers that implicate men beyond Crowley. Men who would prefer their past dealings remain buried. Those ledgers are federal evidence, long out of my hands." Wells smiled thinly. "Copies, Mrs. Carter. We know your late husband was meticulous about copies. What price would convince you to surrender them?" The shop had gone quiet now, machines stilling as women listened. May thought of all the fights to get here, all the small victories that built this life. She stood slowly, meeting Wells's eyes. "There is no price. Now get out of my shop." Wells's face darkened. "You should reconsider. The men I represent have long reaches and longer memories. Your peaceful life here, your husband's position, your adopted daughter's safety also fragile." The threat against Lucy changed everything. May felt the old fear rise, but underneath it, something harder. She'd learned the difference between running from danger and standing against it. "Rebecca," May said calmly, "would you fetch Marshal McBride? Tell him we have a visitor making threats against children." Wells left before the marshal arrived, but his message lingered like smoke. That evening, May called another war council. The original fighters had been joined by newer allies, the bank president who'd seen prosperity come with law and order, the railroad superintendent who valued stable communities, even Judge Watson, earning his redemption one right choice at a time. "We knew this might come," May said. "The question is how we face it." They made plans, guards for the school, watchers on the roads, telegrams to federal authorities. But May knew the real battle would be more subtle. Men like Wells fought with paper and influence, not guns. 2 weeks later, Wells returned with reinforcements, 3 lawyers, and a claim that David Bennett had embezzled funds belonging to their clients. They demanded restitution, backed by documents that looked official enough to fool hasty eyes. The town assembly convened again, 5 years after the first one, but this was a different crowd facing a different May Carter. She entered with boxes of her own documents, not just David's copies of Crowley's ledgers, but 5 years of meticulous records. Every woman employed, every wage paid, every family helped by the shop's quiet charity. "You want to talk about debts?" May addressed the assembly. "Let's talk about what's owed. The wages Crowley never paid his workers, the land he stole through forged deeds, the lives he destroyed with his greed." She laid out the case methodically, showing how the money Wells demanded had never existed except in Crowley's fabricated books. Lucy helped, her young voice clear, as she read columns of figures that proved the fraud. But Wells had his own weapons. He produced affidavits suggesting May had been complicit in her husband's schemes, that she'd hidden assets, that her shop was built on stolen funds, lies wrapped in legal language, but damaging ones. The town split again, old doubts resurfacing. Some newcomers, not knowing the history, wondered if they'd been fooled. May felt the familiar weight of judgment, the urge to whisper, "Don't look at me," and retreat. Then Sister Catherine stood. 5 years ago, a broken woman came to my church. Today, a pillar of our community stands accused by strangers who know nothing of our ways. Who will you believe? One by one, they testified. Women whose lives had changed because May gave them work. Children who could read because she'd taught them. Men who'd learned that strength didn't require cruelty. The courtroom became a tapestry of interconnected lives, all touched by one woman's refusal to stay broken. Judge Watson himself provided the killing blow. He'd kept his own records of Crowley's dealings, documented the real embezzlement. His evidence, combined with federal testimony, destroyed Wells's case entirely. "It seems," Marshal McBride said dryly, "that you gentlemen have wasted a long journey. I suggest you take the morning train. Don't miss it." Wells left in defeat, but not before one last attempt. He cornered May outside the shop, desperate now. "You don't understand. These men, they don't forgive debts, real or imagined. They'll collect somehow." May looked at him with something almost like pity. "Then they'll have to get in line. I've survived worse than distant rich men's grudges, and unlike 5 years ago, I'm not alone." As if to prove her point, Eli appeared with several ranch hands. Yazzie emerged from the telegraph office. Rebecca and the seamstresses gathered in the shop doorway. Even some of the miners, rough men who'd once whispered about the scandalous widow, stood ready. Wells saw what May had built not just a business, but a community that protected its own. He left on the morning train and never returned. That evening, May stood in her shop as the sewing machines wound down for the day. 5 years of tears and thread had soaked into these floors. The woman who'd once cowered in Crowley's storage shed now employed half the women in town and had faced down lawyers with the same steel she'd found facing down guns. A young woman appeared in the doorway, familiar in her hesitation. Bruises marked her arms, and her eyes held that particular emptiness May recognized too well. "I heard," the woman began, then stopped. "I heard you help people like me." May crossed to her immediately, extending gentle hands. "Come in. You're safe here. What's your name?" "Grace," the woman whispered. "Well, Grace, let's get you some food and a place to rest. Tomorrow, if you want, I'll teach you to sew. It's good work, honest work. And while your hands are busy, sometimes the heart finds ways to heal." As May led Grace inside, she caught sight of herself in the shop window. Gray touched her hair now, and lines mapped the journeys of tears and laughter across her face. But her eyes were clear, her shoulders straight. The woman who'd once begged not to be seen now stood as a beacon for others lost in similar darkness. The shop filled with evening rituals, machines covered, work sorted, plans made for tomorrow. Lucy helped Grace settle in the upstairs room, chattering about school and town gossip with the easy warmth of a child who'd never learned to fear kindness. Eli arrived as the sun touched the horizon, finding May on their porch as always. He settled beside her, their comfortable silence worth more than any words. After a while, Lucy joined them, then Rebecca with her new baby, then Way and his family from next door. The porch filled with quiet conversation and gentle laughter, the sound of lives intertwined. "Remember that first day?" Eli asked softly. "When you said, 'Don't look at me.'" May smiled, taking his weathered hand in hers. "I was so afraid of being seen, afraid that if people really looked, they'd find me worthless. And now," she gestured at the gathered friends, the thriving shop, the town they'd helped rebuild. "Now I know that being seen, truly seen, is how we heal. It's how we find each other. It's how we change things." As stars emerged in the desert sky, May thought about Grace upstairs, beginning her own journey from shadow to light. Tomorrow there would be teaching, and probably tears, and certainly the slow work of rebuilding a broken spirit. But tonight, surrounded by chosen family and hard-won peace, May Carter sat in full view of the world and felt only gratitude. The desert wind carried wood smoke and distant music, the eternal sounds of life persisting despite all hardship. San Miguel Crossing had become more than a frontier town. It was proof that communities could choose justice over fear, that broken people could build beautiful things, that sometimes the best revenge against cruelty was simply living well. "I love you," May told Eli, the word still a small miracle after all these years. "I love you too," he replied. "Every scar, every story, every stubborn, courageous inch of you." They sat together as night deepened, the woman who'd learned to be seen and the man who'd learned to look, surrounded by the life they'd built from ashes and determination. In the morning, there would be work. There was always work. But tonight, they had this love, community, and the quiet triumph of ordinary happiness won from extraordinary pain. The story of "Don't Look at Me" had become the story of "Look What We've Done," and it was beautiful. Thank you so much for listening to this story from the Wild West. I hope May and Eli's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more tales of courage, love, and redemption from the American frontier. What did you think of May's transformation? Which moment moved you the most? Share your thoughts below. I read every comment and love connecting with fellow Western story enthusiasts.